Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a very interesting little poem of 8 sections called Fancies at Navesink. Now, this is an interesting collection. We're going back to the Seadrift cluster for sure. Whitman may have visited Navesink, scholars suggest, on the New Jersey coast in the summer of 1883-84. With Husky Lips O.C., another Sands at 70 poem. This was also inspired by the poet's visit to the Jersey shore. Now, our assumptions are that you have been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, and you have been already introduced to our Sands at 70 collection. And we just finished with Halcyon Days. Now, our Nortons will tell us quite a bit of information here about the Navesink 8 poems. This group of 8 poems, after rejection by W.H. Eldon, editor of the Harpers, was first published in 19th Century, a magazine, a newspaper, August of 1885. It takes its place with the Seadrift cluster, which it indeed surpasses with respect to sustained unity of theme and mood as evidence of the fascination of the sea upon the poet's mind and art and his sense of kinship with its rhythms. Abundant manuscript materials show how thoroughly Whitman worked upon this series, composing, amending, rejecting. There is manuscript evidence he had considered a grouping somewhat different from the one printed, including some poems later separately placed. And then to finish, Navesink is a seaside elevation on the New Jersey coast at the lower entrance of the New York Bay. Now, I love this collection of lines. They are fun to read out loud, so we'll have some fun doing it. Just remember that, you'll remember that Fancies was used in Song of Myself 33, I Fling Out My Fancies, and the very last poem of Leaves of Grass, of course, Goodbye My Fancy, will play with this same word. Navesink only gets used one time, and it's right here. Now, the first of these, they're called 8 poems, although when you look at the table of contents of the deathbed edition, you'll often just see that it's called Fancies at Navesink, and then there will be just like italicized names, because it's hard to know if these. I like to think of this as one sustained poem, which is why we're treating it as one sustained poem, with these little titles as opposed to numbers. Part 1, The Pilot in the Mist. Streaming the Northern Rapids. Streaming is a fun motif already. Streaming the Northern Rapids, an old St. Lawrence reminiscence taking us back to A Child Went Forth. A sudden memory flash comes back. Remember, a few poems ago it was memories. I know not why, and I love that. I know not why. In other words, this is one of those images that I have in my head. I'm not sure exactly why. Here, waiting for the sunrise. Notice we'll begin with the sunrise and end with the sunset as we go through this collection of poems. Here, waiting for the sunrise, gazing from this hill. Again, notice the agains here of 3 of them. Again, 'tis just at morning. A heavy haze, go back to out of May's show Selected to see his use of haze. A heavy haze contends with daybreak. After the trembling, laboring vessel veers me, I press through foam-dashed rocks that almost touch me. Again I mark where aft the small, thin Indian helmsman looms in the mist, with brow elate and governing hand. You'll remember the only other use of Indian will come from far Dakota's canyons. And looms is only used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. By the way, notice that his comment about this native helmsman is elate and governing hand is positive, not negative. Part 2, had I the choice to tally greatest bards. Now, of course, tally we're all together familiar with. Go back to our comments. Earlier lectures, of course, Harold Bloom made a whole lot of this use of the word tally. To line their portraits, stately, beautiful, and emulate at will. Who are these great poets? The bards, the great bards. Homer, with all his wars and warriors, and then he'll give us the 3, Hector, Achilles, Ajax. It's interesting that he starts with Hector. Of course, we've given full lectures on the Iliad at learnstrong.net if you want to run that to ground. Or Shakespeare's Woe Entangled, notice his 3s here. Hamlet, Lear, Othello. We've been commenting all the way through our lectures how Homer and Shakespeare stand so much behind what's happening here. And of course Tennyson. Now it's Tennyson's Fair Ladies. We think of Lady of Shalott, of course. We've given full lectures as well at learnstrong.net. Meter or wit the best, or choice conceit to weld in perfect rhyme delight of singers, in other words, Homer and Shakespeare, obviously delight of singers. We'll finish with singers at the end of this collection of 8 poems. These, oh see, all these I'd gladly barter, sounding very much like Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. You'll remember that one from the 1812 offering. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. He says it this way: I would give all that to barter. Would you, the undulation of one wave, its trick to me, transfer? So here it is, almost like an invocation again, asking the sea to become an inspiration. Or, breathe one breath of yours upon my verse, and leave its odor there. Again, every time he uses this word leave, I always come back to, of course, his having a bit of fun with leaves of grass. Odor, you'll remember from Song of Myself 19, the odor of hair. And then part 3, you tides with ceaseless swell. And then notice the exclamation point. You power that does this work. You unseen force, centrifugal, through spaces spread, rapport of sun, moon, earth, and all the constellations. And now it's going to get 8 questions here, rhetorical questions. What are the messages by you from distant stars to us? What Sirius, what Capellas, what central heart, and you the pulse vivifies all? What boundless aggregate of all? What subtle indirection and significance in you? What clue to all in you? What fluid vast identity holding the universe? Remember I commented about holding, grasping, hugging. Holding the universe with all its parts as one, as sailing in a ship. Again, back to Passage to India, no question. And this series of like rhetorical questions to speak now from the sea to obviously the distant stars. So we're going all over the place for Whitman. We're here talking now about inspiration, aren't we? And then part 4, last of ebb and delight and daylight waning. Now we're coming from the sun, from the morning to the afternoon, evening. Scented sea cool. You'll remember from, here just a few seconds ago with odor. Scented sea cool, landward making, smells of sedge and salt incoming, with many a half-caught voice sent up from the eddies, many a muffled confession, many a sob and whispered word, as of speakers far or hid. I think of Keats's Ode to a Nightingale as I read these lines. How they sweep down and out, how they mutter, or from whispering to mutter. Poets, unnamed, artists, greatest of any. We're back to Dante, aren't we, in his limbo moment when he meets all those great, great poets and he hopes that he can somehow be a part of that. And I think there's much of Dante and Shakespeare and Homer obviously standing, along with Milton obviously, standing behind some of these lines. Artist greatest of any with cherished lost designs. Long and lost play heavily in this little 8 poem collection. Love's unresponse, a chorus of ages' complaints, hopes, last words, some suicide's despairing cry, away to the boundless waste and never again return. Of course, his use of the word suicide will take us back to Song of Myself number 8. And now we'll get the 4 ons. On to oblivion then. On, do your part, ye burying, eddying tide. So now all of a sudden it's as if the tide, if the ocean isn't going to give him inspiration, then it's going to be somehow like, you know, that which buries. On for your time, ye furious debouche, outlet, opening, right? And then part 5. And yet, not you alone. So there's like a movement, a tension, almost like an artistic meditation, different perspectives on inspiration. And yet, not you alone, twilight and burying ebb, nor you lost designs alone, nor failures, aspirations. I know, divine, deceitful ones, your glamours seeming. And it's as if he's saying now that all of the great poets before, maybe he doesn't necessarily want to stand in their shadow. Duly by you, from you, the tide and light again. Duly the hinges turning, notice the 3 dulies. Duly the needed discord parts offsetting, blending, and then he uses the word weaving, which obviously will take us back to Homer and the Odyssey, right? I told you guys when we did those lectures over the Odyssey, how weaving is a central motif of our study of that. Weaving from you, from, notice all capitalized, from sleep, night, death, notice the 3, itself, the rhythmus of birth, eternal. Again, I think so much of this poem is about Inspiration, poetic inspiration. Whitman is continuing to ask the questions of where does poetic inspiration come from? And then now to part 6. Proudly the flood comes in, shouting, foaming, advancing. Again, notice all his trinities. Long it holds at the high, with bosom brought out swelling, all throbs, dilates, the farms, woods, streets of cities. Notice we go from the rural to the urban. Workmen at work, we obviously saw that with Here America singing. Mainsails, topsails, jibs, all of the referencing now to the marine. Appear in the offing, steamers, pennants of smoke, and under the forenoon sun, we think about a Brooklyn ferry obviously here. Freighted with human lives, gaily the outward bound, gaily the inward bound, flaunting from many a spar the flag I love. And the flag I love as a phrase gets used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. And it is about that inspiration, that what it is that he wants to accomplish in his poetry. And now as we come to the end, part 7, by that long scan of waves, myself called back. Again, song of myself comes to mind. Resumed upon myself, notice the repetition of myself. In every crest, some undulating light or shade, some retrospect, joys. We'll think of Mystic Trumpeter as we finish this. Joys, travels, studies. Remember beginning my studies at the beginning of Leaves of Grass. Silent panoramas, scenes ephemeral, the long past war. And there it is. You knew that if he was going to talk about inspiration, sooner or later, he was going to find himself back talking about the war. And that takes us to Drum Taps, obviously. The battles, hospital sites, we immediately think of Windresser, right? The wounded and the dead. Myself, again for the third time, myself through every bygone phase. Now this will take us back to Shakespeare, and obviously to As You Like It and the 7 stages of man. We've commented on that at Learn Strong elsewhere. And then he'll give it. My idle youth, a child when forth comes to mind. Old age at hand, obviously stands at 70. My 80 years of life summed up and more and past. By any grand ideal tried, intentionless, the whole, a nothing. And it almost seems as if oblivion is the right word from earlier. And happily yet, some drop within God's scheme. It's almost as if he's channeling Tennyson's Ulysses here. You and I are old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note, may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. He seems to be playing similarly. And happily yet some drop within God's scheme ensemble, some wave or part of wave. This is again back to O'Neill Live, that you may contribute a verse, right? Like one of yours, ye multitudinous ocean. In other words, if all of the greatest of the artists are in an ocean, he just wants to be, he doesn't even need to be a wave. I don't need to be a wave. Just give me a part of a wave, a drop of water. That's all he's asking. Finally, part 8. Then, last of all, caught from these shores, this hill, of you, O tides, the mystic human meeting. And again, Mystic Trumpeter comes back to mind. Only by law of you, your swell and ebb. Think about weaving and the way in which weaving is, and then swell and ebb, enclosing me the same. So this is we go from the suicide observation to now enclosing me the same. The brain that shapes, the voice that chants this song. It's an interesting poem, or 8-part poem, if you want to think of it that way. Because it's not altogether clear that we are ending with some sense of triumph or some sense of oblivion. And I think this is why this poem, or collection of poems, ends up in Sands at 70. Because it's not totally clear to Whitman at the end of his life if what he has spent his entire life doing is 100% guaranteed to provide him a place with those other great, as he mentioned, Homer and Shakespeare. We've mentioned Dante and Milton. Of course, we're making the argument in Talks with Walt that yes, Whitman does deserve very much to be in that pantheon, can we say ocean, of the greatest of writers. At 2a, one of the major messages here, I think he's arguing that life is a symphony with many, many faces, and that it's not altogether clear at the very end where in the ocean of greatness our accomplishments will be placed, if at all. At 2b, I love how he constructs this with these 8 parts, but it's clear that it's not actually separate poems. I mean, it's not like any one of these poems can be selected out and would make much sense without all the other parts. That is to say, symphonic. And it might very well be, now to 3A, that T.S. Eliot gained some of his ideas for four quartets from a set of lines like this. We've given full lectures on four quartets at learnstrong.net. But I mentioned Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, and especially that apostrophe to the ocean section of 1812. You can run that to ground, and it learns strong as well. Finally, at 3B, how about you guys? Do you think of your life in phases, or as the ocean in the waves? And to what degree do you just want to be a wave or a part of a wave of that which came before, especially as it relates to artists, for the artists in the house who are thinking about this question of where inspiration even comes from? Thank you.